Welcome back to 1834. Le Bourdonnais is winning 4 games to 2 and it's the first to win 6 that will take this 5th match. Today's guest commentator hasn't arrived yet, so let's just carry on with the game. e4 from McDonnell, e5, knight to f3, knight to c6 from Le Bourdonnais, bishop to c4, bishop to c5, and yes, of course, McDonnell goes for the Evans Gambit. And everyone knows that a gentleman must accept a gambit. Le Bourdonnais is a gentleman, so he accepts. We carry on with c3, so the bishop goes back to a5, and McDonnell takes the time here to castle. We have bishop back to b6, lining up against the king here on this nice diagonal, and now McDonnell plays d4 in the center, which leads to a pawn exchange. We have d6, letting the light square bishop out, and now we've been used to seeing d5 here, chasing away the horse, but this time McDonnell plays h3. h6 in response from Le Bourdonnais, and now we have bishop to b2, just developing his dark square bishop. Now here, knight to f6 would be fine, clearing space for castling, but instead Le Bourdonnais decides to play queen to e7. Now a good move for McDonnell in this position might be to bring his rook across to e1 and put a lot of pressure upon the queen, because should this pawn ever get out of the way, of course the queen is going to be pinned. But instead of this idea, McDonnell plays e5, so Le Bourdonnais captures the pawn, but instead of capturing back with his own pawn, McDonnell on move number 12 decides to activate beast mode, let's go. Instead of capturing, he pushes past and threatens the knight, so the knight jumps out of the way and threatens the light squared bishop. But instead of moving the bishop somewhere safe, McDonnell instead captures the pawn in the middle with his knight. This is now protecting the light square bishop, and it's also covered by the dark square bishop, but should it not have been, you can't capture with the queen anyway because the rook to e1 pin move is still on. So what does Le Bourdonnais do? Well, he realizes the danger and jumps his knight to f6, clearing space for castling. He wants to castle out of this pin danger as soon as he can. What does McDonnell do? Well, he pushes his pawn again and threatens the queen, so the c-pawn captures and threatens the knight, but all it really does is that it allows McDonnell to go further into beast mode. He uses his light square bishop to capture the f-pawn, which comes with check. It's protected by the knight. So the king moves across to d8, and now this pawn is pinned by the queen, so it can't capture the knight. And also, beast mode McDonnell has a few interesting combinations he could use. For example, knight to g6, threaten the queen. Should the queen capture the undefended bishop, the white queen is coming in to capture the central pawn with check, so perhaps you're going to block with the bishop, but now the rook in the corner is lost and the queen is threatened once more. However, McDonnell doesn't go for this knight to g6 idea. Instead, he brings the rook across to e1 and x-rays the queen. You still can't capture the knight with the pawn because the queen still has a pin on the king, and you're also in a lot of danger because should you do some random move like pushing the pawn here, the knight is simply coming to c6, giving a check. It also forks the queen, and it's revealed an attack on the queen from the e1 rook. So even if you capture the knight back here, of course, the queen is lost like so. So what does Le Bourdonnais do in this position? He decides to get his king across to c7 to avoid this massive fork. Beast mode McDonnell just develops his other knight to a3, letting his rook out, and Le Bourdonnais plays a6, perhaps trying to find some more escape squares for his king. But of course McDonnell brings his rook across for a check, and Le Bourdonnais blocks with the bishop, but McDonnell doesn't care, he's in beast mode. He just gives up his rook for the bishop. The pawn captures back, and McDonnell plays his knight back to c4. He's covering this square, and he's also revealed the attack upon the queen. And he can't capture the bishop here because it'll just be instant checkmate from the queen, covered by the knight. All these squares are just completely destroyed by the queen. So instead, Le Bourdonnais brings the queen back to d8, perhaps hoping for a queen exchange. But big bad beast mode Mahé D is not interested in a queen exchange. He brings the dark square bishop in instead for a check, and it's skewering through the escape square here. Of course, the knight's still covering this escape square, so the king doesn't have very many moves. He comes to c5, and the queen gets in on the action, queen to f3. Now, there are not very many squares left for the king. This one is covered by the a3 knight, so Le Bourdonnais decides to block with his own knight, but big Mahé D just captures with his bishop, which comes with check. He doesn't want to recapture with the queen, because if he does, the knight on the rim is getting taken, which again comes with checks. After the king moves, you're losing the black queen. So Le Bourdonnais decides not to do this, and if you look under his comb over, of course, he's starting to sweat a little bit. He decides to run away towards d7 with the king. But McDonnell just brings in another check with the queen. The king moves again, and he is checkmated. So well done, Beast Mode McDonnell. He puts his shade on and makes a quick exit. And just in time, Baldric has turned up. Well done, Baldric. You missed the best game we've seen in a while. Regardless, McDonnell has got one back, and he's now trailing by only 4 games to 3. Join me again next time to see whether he can level out the match. I'll see you then.